Hello, welcome to this video focused on gifted and EMIS reporting, prepared and presented for you by the Ohio Association for Gifted Children Coordinators Division. This video has four purposes today. The first is to review requirements for identifying and serving gifted children. The second is reviewing how we document the screening, assessment, identification, and service for reporting to the state. The third is looking at the requirements for acceleration, and then also reviewing as our fourth one, how to document those accelerations, again, for EMIS reporting. It is recommended that you watch this video with your district's gifted coordinator and or EMIS coordinator so that the two of you can discuss what needs to be done, who's going to take what responsibilities and play what roles in this process. A good solid set of data needs to be turned into the state, and one of the best ways to do that is to ensure there is great communication and teamwork happening between the gifted coordinator and the EMIS coordinator. As a quick review, giftedness in Ohio comes in four different areas. Ohio recognizes giftedness in superior cognitive thinking, specific academic thinking and skills like math, science, reading, and social studies, creative thinking, and visual and performing arts. It's important to note that the tools that are used for identifying giftedness in Ohio must be on Ohio's list of approved assessments. To find this, you can go to the ODE website, go to topics, scroll down to gifted education, then look for gifted screening and identification, and you'll be able to find the chart of approved assessments for gifted education. This chart is updated at least once a year and many times twice a year, and it's important to stay current with what is listed on that chart to ensure that the tools your district is using for gifted identifications are on that list. If a student is identified as gifted using a tool that is not on that list, then that child cannot be considered gifted based on that tool in the state of Ohio. In looking at superior cognitive thinking, this is the state's definition per revised code for gifted identification and superior cognitive thinking. And many districts use the right-hand column, letter A, scoring at least 2 standard deviations above the mean minus the standard error of measurement on a standardized group intelligence test. Also, we do have the option of looking at certain achievement tests that can be used when they score on a composite score at the 95th percentile or above, or they've attained that approved score on an above grade level standardized nationally normed test. Again, any of those tests must be on Ohio's chart of approved assessments. For specific academic ability, it's a similar kind of thing. The student is identified as gifted in, say, reading or mathematics if they've achieved a score that's at or above the 95th percentile at the national level, so the national percentile ranking on an approved test, an approved achievement test. Again, the test must be on the chart of approved assessments. You will note when you look at that chart of approved assessments that Ohio's state tests are not on that chart. This is because those tests were not designed for the purposes of gifted identification, and they are given at the state level. They do not have national norms, and so they cannot be used for gifted identification. In creative thinking, students have 2 prongs that need to be met in order to be identified as gifted in creative thinking. In the first one, students need to score at the appropriate score point on a particular test, like the COGAT or the InView, one of those. And then they also need to have a particular score on a checklist of creative behaviors or on a test of creative thinking ability. So this definition explains that it is one of those, it's the only one that we have in the required identification areas that has 2 parts to it. So there again is that group or individual intelligence test, and then also either a checklist of creative behaviors or a test of creative ability that must be used in identifying creative thinking. Again, the tools need to come from the chart of approved assessments. The fourth area of gifted identification in Ohio is that of visual and performing arts. This also has 2 aspects to it, but this does not involve standardized tests. The first part of this is a display of work. It could be an audition, it might be a portfolio of artwork. It's going to be something like that, along with a checklist of behaviors, a score on a checklist of behaviors related to that specific arts area. So, for example, if you have a student whose parents have asked for consideration of giftedness in music on the piano, that student would then need to perform an audition for a team of judges, and that audition would be evaluated based upon a rubric that is available through the state. And then the second part of that is going to be a checklist of behaviors for instrumental music. And that checklist would be completed by a teacher who is familiar with that student and his or her skills. So those are the two prongs for visual and performing arts. It does not involve standardized testing like other parts of gifted identification in the other areas. Required reporting to the state includes 4 things. We have screening, assessment, identification, and service. And this is required reporting for all 4 areas of giftedness. So keep in mind, we've got 4 areas of identification. We have 4 things that must be reported around that. The screening requirements required by ODE include 2 whole grade screening opportunities, and they are required for 3 of those 4 areas of giftedness. We must do whole grade screenings for superior cognitive ability, specific academic ability, specifically in math, and reading, writing, or a combination of the 2, and creative thinking. You'll notice that visual and performing arts is not a whole grade screening element here. All students must participate in the whole grade screening or have the opportunity to participate in the whole grade screening once after the start of kindergarten and before the end of 2nd grade, and again once after they complete 2nd grade and before the end of 6th grade. These are the minimum requirements. So some districts conduct more screenings than that. And one thing to think about is if your district uses a progress monitoring tool, a test like MAP, NWEA MAP, or I just lost the name of the other one. I'm so sorry. There's a really common one, iReady. Thank you. Sorry for that. MAP and iReady are fairly common, and those can be used for gifted identification. Check the chart of approved assessments to make sure they haven't had any changes to that. But if your district is using MAP, you could be looking at those reading and math scores from the MAP test every time those tests are given to students, and that you would then report that as screening, especially if that's given to the entire grade level. So it's important to keep that in mind. And again, 2 whole grade screenings are the minimum. Some districts choose to use these whole grade screenings more often than that. There is a difference between screening and assessment in pure terms. So if you're a gifted coordinator thinking, wait a minute, these things mean 2 different things, you're right in the purest academic sense. Screening typically is not considered to provide an identification. It's actually often thought of as this is what we're going to use to see who needs a deeper assessment to make an identification. However, for EMIS purposes, that whole grade testing is considered screening. So if your entire 2nd grade is going to be taking the COGAT this coming school year, that would be reported as a whole grade screening for superior cognitive thinking. When you are reporting screening versus assessment in EMIS, you need to keep the following in mind. Screening whole grade involves an assessment from the chart of approved assessments. It's screening those 3 areas of giftedness named before, so superior cognitive thinking, specific academic and math and reading, and creative thinking between the beginning of kindergarten and the end of 2nd grade, and again between the beginning of 3rd grade and the end of 6th grade. Assessment is when an individual or a small group is looked at more specifically, and again the assessment will come from the chart of approved assessment. It is often conducted as a follow-up to whole grade screening. So a student's score on, say, the InView is in a rescreening or a retesting range. Okay, the student didn't make the identification score point that is in the chart of approved assessments, but was within what the district calls its rescreening range. Then an assessment would be conducted to give that student that additional opportunity. Assessments are also conducted when a referral is made requesting assessment, and that can be made by a parent. It can be made by a teacher. It can even be made by the student himself or herself. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got this 7th grader in my math class, I really think this child might be identified as gifted, that's the start of that referral process. And then an individual could be tested, and that would be considered assessment. A couple of reminders around this. Gifted identification is required. We are required by law in the state of Ohio to conduct gifted identification. A second point that's also important to remember is that once a student has an identification in giftedness, that identification is always present. So a 2nd grader who is identified as gifted in math will be identified as gifted in math all the way through that K-12 career, that from grade 2 forward. It does not matter if the score on whatever tools are used in the future suggests that perhaps they're not gifted. That's not the case. Once that identification has been made, that identification stays put. And this comes out of the document implementing the operating standards for identifying and surveying students who are gifted. You can find that on ODE's website. And then the final thing to remember is that gifted service is not required. The identification is required, the service is not. Of course, speaking as a gifted coordinator in a district myself, I certainly hope that your district will work to serve those gifted students. It's important. When it comes to EMIS and reporting, it's really important to be accurate with entering that screening and identification information. Accuracy is so critical to getting accurate information into the state and getting the most out of that gifted report card indicator. We want to have the most current, up-to-date data that we are sharing, not just for ourselves, but also for our stakeholders. So this is a screenshot of what the student gifted record looks like in Dazzle. If your district uses Progress Book, then this is the kind of screen that you will see when you go to enter this information. And you'll notice that there are columns across the top where you'll use check boxes to note whether screening was conducted, whether an assessment was conducted. Once a student is identified, the date of identification needs to be recorded. And then if the student is being served, if that student is receiving services per ODE's requirements and has a written education plan, that box would be checked as well. So that's what the student gifted record looks like in Dazzle. When you go to enter this information into Dazzle, you can do this by creating a gifted rule and running a gifted mass update. You can also do this with individual screening and assessment. So for example, as gifted coordinator, I receive a request for a student to be assessed for possible giftedness, and I work with our school's psychologist to get that assessment completed. I would then enter that as an individual assessment at that time. In Infinite Campus, it looks a little bit different. One of the most important things to remember is that every year, the EMIS coordinator, or if you've decided that the gifted coordinator is going to do this, the records need to be rolled forward to the next year. So this is, I'm going to be honest, I have used both of these programs, but I have not used Infinite Campus as much. And I would recommend you talk with your EMIS coordinator or your ITC about the process of rolling forward in Infinite Campus. You see a couple of the screens there for what that should look like. So when everything is rolled forward properly, which is what you'll see on the left-hand screen, then on the right-hand screen, when you're looking at a specific student's gifted record, you're going to see that there's the year, there are the subject areas, and you'll see identifications that are made because they'll have that identification date behind it rather than the phrase not identified. So that's what we need to do with Infinite Campus. You'll also see down below in that gifted record that there are boxes for screened, assessed, and service. So this is also where you would record service in Infinite Campus, one of the places. When you're entering that screening and assessment data, you can use the gifted batch update tool to create and update those records. And that's you'll see the thread to use, the kind of the breadcrumb trail to use. It's under program admin, gifted, and then batch update. And you can update those records in that way. That's especially helpful with whole grade screening, because if you've got 300 second graders going individually and entering screened for 300 students is incredibly time consuming, and the batch update is just much more efficient. After you've used that gifted batch update tool, you can also use this to update gifted records in terms of program participation. So if all of those second graders, let's say you have 35 second graders that have been identified as gifted in math, and they're all being served, you can indicate that with a batch update as well. When you go to enter service, again, accuracy is the key. And it's not just simply checking that box in either Dazzle or an Infinite Campus or whatever your particular program is that your district is using, if you use PowerSchool or one of those. So in Dazzle, there are two places that have to be marked in order to record service for gifted. First, that served box must be checked for each student in that gifted identification area. And then the second place that needs to be recorded is in the student program records. And that is where we show how services are received. And if it is a gifted intervention specialist that is providing the service, we actually need to have who that GIS is. So that information needs to be recorded. This slide is going to show you the specifics of how to go about doing this. So if you've got a large number of students that you need to record, for example, your middle school is serving the majority of gifted students through cluster groups, this would be the way to do that quickly. You can create an ad hoc membership. You have to do this at the school level, not at the district level. In the go-to box, you can search membership, choose membership members, and then under 20 specialized instructions, you can choose the code that we use for the service. So you'll see the example at the bottom of the screen is the 205062, which is service provided in the regular classroom with cluster grouping. When you have students entered and you have their ID, you have a list of their IDs, you can easily do a group or a batch update like this. It's an ad hoc update. You can also enter the effective start and end date, and then also the staff member who's providing the service, and then save. For Infinite Campus, this is where we're going to use the flags. And so you'll go to the student flag editor, you'll select the code that you need, the start date and the end date, and that information is recorded in that way. And here are a couple of more screens to show you what you need to look at. You need to look at the program admin flags, and then you also have the option of that batch assignment tool. So you could assign those flags to lots of students, again, being more efficient with your use of time. It's also important with service to note that you may need to record this through course. And so here's an example where you'll see under math on this student's schedule, it says gifted math. There's a teacher's name listed there. And then in that course, you can click on that and go down to, it's a little hard to see, but I believe it says student population, and it says gifted education K-12. And then from there, you can go in to put the rest of the information that you need. For example, in this case, they're using program code. So it's the 206070, which is going to be service provided by a gifted intervention specialist. Accelerations are also important for accuracy. You've got to be very accurate with accelerations, and it's really important to have good communication between schools, teachers, gifted coordinator, and EMIS coordinator for this. First, it's important to note that acceleration and giftedness are not interchangeable. If you are gifted, you are not automatically going to be accelerated. If you are accelerated in a subject area, you're not necessarily gifted. The two are really two separate things. But in most districts, the gifted coordinator does work with the EMIS coordinator and the schools for reporting accelerations because it's not unusual for gifted students to be accelerated. But again, don't assume that because a student is listed as accelerated that they should also have an identification. That's not necessarily the case. They can be accelerated in a subject area without being gifted in that area, and they can be gifted in an area, but it's not appropriate to accelerate. When we go to report accelerations, there are two things that we need to look at. The first is the subject in the area of acceleration and the test that student will take if they're taking a state-tested subject. And then the second thing to look at is the acceleration count. So let's start with the subject area of acceleration and the test. First, we have to report the subject of the acceleration. So math is often used for acceleration. We'll say math. Then we need to report the Ohio State test or the end of course exam that's going to be taken if the acceleration is in a state tested subject, and math is. When we report that, that's going to allow our district to receive those bump up points on the performance index for that acceleration. So if I have a fifth grader who's going to be taking sixth grade math, for that fifth grader, I would report math, and I would report that that student is going to take the sixth grade math test. The acceleration count is where we take a look at what level of acceleration is happening. It is used every time there's an acceleration starting. So let's say that that fifth grader who's going to take sixth grade math, this is the first time that student's ever done any kind of acceleration in math. So that student is going to receive a written acceleration plan, and that needs to be written only in the first year of the acceleration. Then the acceleration count that gets reported is a 1 that indicates it's the first year of a 1 grade level acceleration. Again, the example is a fifth grader taking sixth grade math. Let's say that student does really well with sixth grade math and just continues on. So as a sixth grader is taking seventh grade math, as a seventh grader is taking eighth grade math, as an eighth grader is taking algebra. In those following years, there's no written acceleration plan, and the acceleration count goes to 0 because that student is not accelerating again in the pathway that he or she is in. If that fifth grader did really so well with sixth grade math that the school, the teachers, the parents, administrators have decided, hey, you know what? This student's going to be in sixth grade next year, but would really benefit from moving into eighth grade math as a sixth grader, then that would be an additional acceleration. There would be a new written acceleration plan written, and that count would be at a 1 because it's an additional acceleration that's being made in that year. This can sometimes be a little bit confusing. So EMIS coordinators, it's great to talk with your district's gifted coordinator about this. And sometimes it's really good to contact the gifted consultant at your ESC and just talk through it, especially if you're dealing with a fairly unique situation, just to make sure that everybody is thinking through that whole thing. And again, that what gets reported is accurate. When you go to report accelerations in DAZZLE, in Progress Book, there are 2 places that need to be taken care of. First is the Accelerated Student tab, and the second one is the Student Acceleration FB record. Both of those need to be completed accurately in order to report accurately to the state. So Accelerated Student records the state test that's going to be taken by the student. The Student Acceleration FB record is noting the area of acceleration, the level count, so that's where we'd have that acceleration count of 1 for the first year of acceleration and a 0 for the subsequent years. And we also put in the assessment flag. What that's going to look like when you're actually doing this is, we'll see in a second. If a student is taking a course above his or her grade level or is being whole grade accelerated, we've got to create that FB record, and those have to be maintained every single year. So 2 examples. If you've got a sixth grader taking seventh grade math and they're accelerating for the first time, the assessment area is math, the level count is 1, and the assessment flag would be Y. Yes, they're going to be taking a test. The next year, we'll say for 2021-22, it's the same student who's now a seventh grader taking eighth grade math. The assessment area is mathematics. The level count is 0. The assessment flag is a Y. The accelerated student records also need to be completed, and this one really works only for grade levels below high school. So this one, again, can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes it's great for gifted coordinators and EMIS coordinators to work together on this. This is where you record the Ohio State test the student will be taking in his or her accelerated courses. In this example, math. So this is what the accelerated student record would look like for our fifth grader who's going to be taking both fifth and sixth grade math in a single year. They're doing a compacting of sorts. So this student is a fifth grader, but the accelerated student record is going to look like what you see on the screen here. So the test is going to be grade 6 mathematics for OST, and then it's mathematics, and it's accelerated grade 6. You can see just based on that test, if you have eighth graders taking Algebra 1 is not an option on this dropdown. So that's why it works for grade levels below high school. Once we get into high school courses, this one is not going to work for you. When we go to report accelerations in Infinite Campus, we need to use the student enrollment record to record the acceleration count. Do not use the pre-ID to record the acceleration. You have to use the student enrollment record. And you're also going to use the grade level of the test to record the test that's going to be taken. So under the student enrollment record, you're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and that's where you'll be able to add in that acceleration. And this is what it looks like when you get there. You'll see that in this particular case, the student is accelerated 1 level in reading, 2 levels in math. So this student is going to have quite a written acceleration plan, because the student is maybe a 6th grader who's going to take 7th grade language arts and is going to take 8th grade math for the very first time. The student's already accelerated in social studies, which is why there's a 0 there. That's the acceleration count. A 0 is currently accelerated, is staying in that pathway. This has to be updated every year to reflect the current count for the student. So in the following year, if the student doesn't do any additional acceleration, all 3 of those would be recorded as 0 currently accelerated. We definitely need to use that acceleration versus the pre-ID. Okay, the pre-ID is what you see on the right. That is not going to record the acceleration count. So it's not used as part of acceleration recording for the state. We have to use what you see on the left. In Infinite Campus, we also have to set up that grade level for the test. And this is going to show you how to do that. Again, you'll go to assessment and then to test setup. And when you get to test detail, that is where you can put in that information. So if you have, say, a 5th grade math course that is really going to take those students through 5th grade math and 6th grade math, you could set that course up where the test grade level would be grade 6, even though it's a 5th grade math class, because they are being accelerated. And you would probably be naming it like accelerated math or something along those lines as well. Whenever we're talking about gifted reporting, it's the collaboration and the accuracy that can make all the difference in being successful with this process. Every district sets this up a little bit differently. In some districts, the gifted coordinator provides information to the EMIS coordinator on spreadsheets, and the EMIS coordinator takes care of putting everything into the district's management system, whether that's PowerSchool or Progress Book Dazzle or Infinite Campus or whatever the system is. In other districts, the gifted coordinator has the responsibility of getting things into those systems, and the EMIS coordinator is then gathering that and uploading that as needed to the state. Don't be afraid as a gifted coordinator to talk with your EMIS coordinator about what reports he or she can pull from the state before submission to just review and make sure everything is accurate. It's really, really helpful and useful to do that. Again, collaboration and communication is so critical. When everybody's working together in this, the process moves a whole lot more smoothly. There are fewer errors, and everyone can be much more confident about what's happening with the data. Some tips for success include knowing who's responsible for what when it's documenting gifted reporting and accelerations in whatever platform your district is using. It's really important to ask questions, both gifted coordinator and EMIS coordinator of each other, but also the gifted consultants at your ESC, ITC's EMIS specialists, and even gifted coordinators in your area. If you're part of a group, don't be afraid to reach out to the other gifted coordinators in your area when you have those situations that are raising questions. Check in with each other regularly. I know, speaking as a gifted coordinator in a district, my EMIS coordinator is wonderful about passing along to me things she gets as updates at her meetings that she goes to. Plan ahead and enter data throughout the year. I know that probably sounds like it could be a bit of a dream, especially in a year like what we've just had, but when you can get data entered throughout the year, it makes that end of year so much smoother and really allows you to focus in May, June, even into early July if you have to, on verifying that everything is accurate, everything is entered appropriately. And then double and triple check what's been entered. It's a wonderful way to just make sure everything is completely current, everything is accurate. It's amazing, just those little things that can sometimes slip through the cracks. And so when you double check, you can catch those things. Those are just some tips for success. I want to give thanks to Julie Dudones from Cuyahoga Falls. She has contributed to this presentation, and she's also contributed to my growth as a gifted coordinator by sharing information about Dazzle and gifted reporting. Kim Adams is the student and EMIS support liaison at LGCA out of Paynesville, and she also has been so helpful with this process and shared information about Infinite Campus and reporting through that. And I'd also like to thank Laura Danko, who's the EMIS coordinator at Norton City Schools. She has been the one I collaborate with the most as gifted coaching coordinator at Norton, and she's been a very big part of helping me learn how to do this, and the two of us collaborating together have been very helpful. Please don't hesitate to watch the rest of the videos in this series and reach out to anyone around you, gifted coordinator, EMIS coordinator, gifted consultants, ITC specialists, who can help support you in this process of reporting data. Thank you so much. Have a great day.